Welcome to Madlit Musings, the podcast where you get to eavesdrop on your favorite authors without getting caught. I've been stoked to have authors like Angela Hunt, Bill Myers, Nicole Deese, Tessa Afshar, comedian Bob Smiley, and more on the show, and this year I have another great lineup of storytellers and truth-sayers. If you love to eavesdrop at coffee shops like I do, this is the podcast for you. It's where we get real, we get tough, we laugh, and we might even cry. It's where we meet authors on a different level, where every story and podcast episode has its own heartbeat. So hang out with me today. I'm Jaime Jo Wright, your host at Madlit Musings. This is your podcast for real chats with real authors about real life. Hi everyone, it's Jaime Jo Wright here, and today's episode of Madlit Musings is super exciting for me because I had the opportunity to talk to some writers with a different point of view. Now, I know that most of us who come here are expecting to talk to authors of the Christian faith and to talk about Christian fiction, but there's so many other authors out there who come from different backgrounds and different belief systems. So today, I'm really excited to feature a good friend that I've had the opportunity to meet in the writing world, and we're going to have an interesting conversation. We're going to be talking about their books, and we're also going to be talking about the differences in our faiths and our belief systems. So stay tuned, and I'm really excited to bring you these amazing guests. Hey everyone, it is Jaime Jo Wright here with Madlit Musings, and I'm back to chat with another new author on the show, and I'm super excited because I have with me Aspry Jones, who I just found out is from New Jersey, which is a cool state. I don't get to talk to people out east too much, and I don't know why that is, but welcome.
That's really funny because that's all we do is talk. We talk a lot.
Do you talk? Then you and I will get along just fine then, because
Okay, yeah, I expect it.
I'm from Wisconsin, but I probably am the biggest talker in the world. So I'll ramble. I'll change subjects 6 times. We'll be
It
good
should
to
be
go.
fun then.
I know. Get ready for a podcast
I'll try to
you've
keep
never
up.
been on. But you have a novel coming out. But before we talk about that, you've got a lot of experience, 25 years of it, in New York City's broadcasting scene. You've done news, financial reporting, sports broadcasting, good gracious, overseeing morning shows, sound and video engineer. I'm just going to retire now on podcasting because you probably know way more than I do. But that sounds like a lot
Go
of
ahead and
fun.
retire. Retirement's fun. Trust me on that.
Well, once you retire, then you start to write books and get back to your first love, right?
Right. Protectors of the Light Crown.
There we go. I was just going to say Protectors of the Light Crown is what we're here to talk about today. And it is a sci-fi fantasy novel, correct?
Yes, it is indeed.
All right. Indeed. Well, instead of me talking and using up all the space, why don't you tell us a little bit about what the book is and the story behind it? I'm excited to hear.
Protectors of the Light Crown is a sci-fi story where a group of outcast heroes get together and they try to kill the devil, basically.
Ooh.
So if you look at pretty much every fantasy book ever written, that's what they're like. That's the premise. But my story has a multiversal theme where they hop regularly between realities. Pseudo main character of the book is named Dexter Park, and whenever he goes to sleep, he finds himself in a different reality. And the book is based around that. And I would say that it's unlike most fantasy novels in that I'm not incorporating trolls or elves or dwarves, things of that nature. I'm going the angels and demons route.
Okay.
So I'm basing it around, as far as any spiritual aspects are concerned, yeah. You could say that a lot of fantasy books actually were based around such things. Or Tolkien, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. They all had faithful themes to them. I'm not trying to do that, but it just so happened that I used angels and demons.
So there is kind of a supernatural, allegorical element to this story. Then, am I correct?
Absolutely, 100%.
Okay.
Not a lot of it.
Yep.
I incorporate a ton of science because I'm a big fan of quantum physics. But,
okay.
It veers back and forth. And one of the more challenging aspects of writing the book was trying to make sure that it all made sense and it didn't jump too far back and forth to jar the reader.
Right.
I made sure to keep that from happening, and my feedback says I was successful with that. But that's up to you to decide when you read it.
Yeah, I write split time stories where it's past and present, and we have cold cases that go back and forth, and so I get a little bit of what you're saying. And
Mhm.
I'll have some readers go, I can't keep track of everything, and I'm like, it's just 1890 in present day. So you said you're a big fan of quantum physics. So for those of us who are nowhere near as smart as you, can you give us a brief definition of what quantum physics is? I'm talking to you. Yes. I can already tell you're like leaps and bounds ahead of me. So tell me and my listeners, what is just a general basic, because I know quantum physics is super basic, wink, wink, definition of what it is.
Well, quantum physics is a science that delves into the extremely small, basically, hence the quantum part. We're talking about things going on in the on the atomic level and beyond and further down, where science it gets to a point where science can't even figure out exactly what's going on. And you could argue that that's basically the case across the board with all sciences, because in many cases, science will just in science will say, okay, this is what things are, and so forth and so on. And then in 50 years, when technology gets better and research gets stronger, they say, okay, remember what we said 50 years ago? That's not the case. This is the new thing. So that happens a lot in science.
It does. Yeah.
So yeah, you basically just have to go with the flow.
Right, right. Well, yeah, I was doing some research on, don't get scared. I'm not really poisoning people in real life, but in my books, I had to find kind of an old way to treat certain maladies that was also poisonous. And I found out they used heroin for a short time in production by a specific pharmaceutical company as a medicine to treat until they found out how highly addictive heroin was. So it was a short time in the early, it's where heroin was used for medicinal purposes. And it's just another one of those things where science is like, you're like, well, that's not quite where we're going to go with this anymore.
That's fascinating. That must have blown your mind doing that
It
research.
totally blew my mind. In fact, I didn't believe it. I didn't believe it. It was in a book, and I'm like, yeah, there's no way. And I researched it, and the company existed. There's pictures of their bottles and everything. So it's science is interesting. I don't know that is quantum physics, but it just kind of going along the line of what you're saying, where it changes over time.
Right. Well, you know what? We humans were funny that once upon a time somebody said, wow, I'm tired. I can't wait to get my hands on some of those energetic, life affirming cigarettes.
Right?
And now we're like, oops.
Yeah,
And
oops.
eventually somebody's going to say, you actually thought Splenda was healthy? What was wrong with these people?
As long as we leave coffee alone, I'm okay with it. I think coffee.
Amen to that.
Thank you. Don't anybody touch our coffee. That's all I'm going to say. That's all I'm going to say. Now, this is interesting. So, Dexter Price is the main character in your book. And
Dexter Park.
Dexter Park. Sorry. You're right. Thank you for correcting me on that. Dexter Park. And I love it. The first definition of what he is a narcoleptic video game tester. Do tell us a little bit about Dexter Park.
Well, Dexter Park. He's a nice guy. He's got a very nerdy background.
Okay.
But he's a little bit of an underachiever.
Okay.
And one of the cliches that I play with in this book is the whole heroes having mommy and daddy issues thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Batman's parents get killed right in front of him.
Yep.
Superman in the movie, Superman loses his uncle right there in front of him. And, things like that. Dexter's no different. So a big part of his story, he's kind of a ne'er-do-well in that his self-esteem is kind of shot. And on top of all that, he's slightly built. He's a narcoleptic cataplexic. He'll fall asleep at the drop of a hat.
Okay.
Things aren't going too well for him.
Yeah.
But when he goes to sleep, he has these extremely vivid dreams that are so real that he doesn't know what to say about it.
Okay.
And one night he goes to sleep and he finds himself in one of the weirdest, most vivid dreams he ever had. And he accidentally pulls one of the people from that dream into his world. Ooh. And it isn't until later on that he understands that it's not about dreams. It's about you surfing different realities. And him finding that out and finding out that he has superpowers and, trying to deal with certain things in life as well as get over his mommy and daddy issues. That's me building Dexter up in his own mind and, in mine too, as I continue his story.
Yeah. Oh, that's super exciting. I like that. Now, excuse me. it says here too that he encounters Tickle, a mysterious woman from an alternate universe. So is she the one that he brings back with him, or is that a
Yep.
spoiler? Okay.
Nope, not well.
I didn't want to spoil anything, But yeah, so you've got battles with giant reptiles. I like
Yep.
reptiles. That's
Within the
cool.
first 5 chapters. Yes.
Oh,
That was me preparing the reader with buckle up because I'm throwing the kitchen sink at this thing.
those are the
Oh
best kind
yeah.
of books. Those are the best kind of books.
Absolutely. I think so too.
I know. So you have giant reptiles, they're living on a spaceship, and then there's a supernatural threat. And then you bring in angels and demons. So what is there you mentioned earlier there's a slight spiritual thread through this. Is it coming from a specific faith background, or is it just spirituality as kind of a universalistic whole, or Christianity, or what perspective are we coming from?
Well, the thing was, I wasn't prepared to go into to wrap this reality, the reality that I have in the book,
Mm-hmm.
to wrap that reality around the more far-fetched ideas of fairies and unicorns and such like that,
Right.
which you would find in your normal fantasy book. But what I did was I said to myself, I was like, maybe I can incorporate issues from the past where things are just as unfamiliar to today's people
Yeah.
as a unicorn might be or an elf, but something that actually happened in their reality.
Okay. Tell us about the venomous wretch. I want to hear more.
Okay, so the venomous wretch is a former king of the land of Torvinia in this reality's ancient past. And he gets it into his head that he wants to steal divinity and he wants to do so without earning it. And so he does some things that he shouldn't have done, and he ends up accidentally transforming himself into a monster. And that monster is the Lord of the Demons.
Okay.
And so, because this era still has small remnants of angels hanging out with normal people,
Mm-hmm.
not humans in this reality, they're called ligands. So the angels hanging out with ligands, they naturally get into loggerheads with each other.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that power the story. And the wretch is one of those characters who really screwed himself up and is trying to fix it and doesn't care who gets in his way. And I said to myself, that's one of the best ideas I could have for an antagonist, one who is ridiculously desperate and will do anything,
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
the venomous wretch. He's a bad guy because he kind of has to be.
Right. Well, and it sounds like he's one of those bad guys too that in a twisted sort of way you get why he's doing what he's doing. Like one of those, I think the term is like the haunted hero type or the haunted villain, where it's like you want to get behind him, but yet you can't. Right.
Yeah. And yeah, I think you're right on that. And I did that on purpose, but also he does terribly bad things. So I try to make sure that the reader doesn't get too much on his side.
Don't want to get too attached to
all,
the venomous wretch.
He is, after all, the devil.
But they say the devil is deceitful among all things, so he can make himself very lovable, I'm afraid.
Oh, I like that. Okay, yeah, very good. Good twist. Good twist.
Yeah. You gotta be careful of the deceit that lies within the manipulation. So I love it. So when you were coming up with the idea for this book, were you just like, I want to write sci-fi, or how did this come out? Like, I mean, I'm asking 6 questions in one, so bear with me because this is how I talk. But, I'm always interested in people who create completely new worlds. Like for me, it's hard enough to write in the world that we're in, right? But you're creating an entire world. How do you do that? And where do those ideas come from? Like coffee? Just lots of coffee?
Well, I respect the writer in all of our forms, but I have zero interest whatsoever in writing things that are true.
Yeah,
sure. I like the biography or the history. I love history and I love reading history, but I don't have the interest in writing anything like that. I want to see someone's creativity. I want to see you pull crazy things out of your head, make them make sense, and show it to me on paper. I want to read it. And if that's what I want to read, then that's what I want to write.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
That's the approach that I took. And, you could say this was basically 30 years, 28 years in the making, me wanting to write a book. And when I sat down with that pen and pad, I said, I'm not holding back. I'm going to go on as hard as I can on this. It's a 3-book story. I initially thought about making it a 2-book story, but that would have meant that the book 2 would end up being like 1,000 pages. So I had to
Yeah.
turn it into a trilogy,
Yep.
and I think it's better this way.
Mm-hmm.
And it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't the initial plan, but I think it's better this way because I get to really get into my characters and get into the story.
Yeah, you can really build that world and stretch it out too. And I think that's one of the things readers love with world building is you become part of something that, yeah, is fictional and doesn't exist, but it becomes so real as a
Yeah,
reader.
and it's so fun because, like, when I first did it, I didn't know it was going to be such a commitment. And I sat there and I was like, wow, I've got to create religions. I've got to
Mm.
create cultures. I've got to
Mm-hmm.
create entire countries. You know,
Wow.
it was deep, man. So I got into it. I said, okay, let's go. And I drank some coffee, some
There you go.
espresso,
There you go.
and I pulled out some note cards and I just started writing and writing and writing until it started. I said, this might work.
Yeah.
And I just ran with it. And I love the way it.
Oh, that's so fun. Now, did you really go full out Tolkien and create your own language?
I tried not to do that. I tried not
Smart
to do
man.
that. Yeah, let me tell you why. Because our reality parallels the reality in the book.
Okay.
A lot of things don't line up in our histories that do line up with the histories with these ligands.
Okay.
But I work on the premise that at some point or another, the same thing has to happen in both worlds to make certain things happen that the reader is familiar with.
Okay.
So I mean, they've got a Martin Luther King, but he did different stuff.
Interesting.
They've got a Mongol invasion, but it happened and it ended differently. We're talking about things later on that I visit in book 2,
Mm-hmm.
and I thought that was a really cool idea, and I actually got that from Marvel movies where they have certain things that
Mm-hmm.
have to happen in order for time to be linear.
Right.
So I said, okay, well, I have things in our history that have to happen in their history too. So
Yeah.
I did that so that the reader would be familiar with certain things. So when I went into the whole language thing, like for instance, I have a country called Borslow, and the Borslovians they speak kind of a so I basically threw something together that I based on the Swedish language. I did so that was my shortcut away from having to force myself creating languages and
Creating
such
a whole
like that.
language. Right. Oh, I love that though. I like the concept of the parallel worlds, but yet different.
Mhm.
So when Dexter goes into these parallel worlds, is he faced with like an assumption that this is how, like with Martin Luther King Jr. is, his assumption is based on what he knows, but then he sees a different one. Is that like a shock thing for him, or is he expecting differences?
I have yet to deal with the whole shock value thing. That's for book 2. But there are parts where he takes note of. I had to do it. I had to make sure that the reader understood what was going on. So I made sure that there were situations where he would be speaking with people from different realities, and they would talk about, yeah, Amelia Earhart. You mean the woman who the ship captain who got lost sailing I'm like, no, she had a plane. You know what I mean? It would be
Right,
stuff like
right.
that. But Dexter also visits. I try to make sure to go completely left field, but Dexter also visits realities that are completely insane. You know, I had to make sure that that was thrown in there too.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the most, those were the most fun stories to write, the ones that were ridiculously outlandish.
Well, I suppose because you can just let your imagination go wild. There's no
Yeah.
boundaries at that point. I mean, if you're fighting with giant reptiles, come on. I mean,
Yeah. Well, yeah, the crazy's already started.
I was gonna
Why,
say you
you
kind of
can't
throw
back
that out
out
right at
now.
the beginning. Now, this giant reptile, I have to ask because my brain just went there. Is it like crocodilian, or are we talking a
Like a
mixture, or
giant
just
lizard.
completely different from anything our world knows?
No, it's like a giant lizard.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, it's actually, so as not to go too deep into the story, this was around like chapter 13. I explain where the lizard came from.
Okay.
And I did that on purpose because I wanted the reader to just keep on reading and reading and go, What, he forgot about the lizard? He's not going to tell us anything about the lizard. You know what I mean? And then I'm like, boom! This is where it comes. This is where it happens. So yeah, it's not this lizard actually happens in their universe, and it's one of the untold stories. But I eventually get to it. There's a perfectly good reason for it.
Well, I'm sure there is. I'm sure there
Yeah.
is. Okay, so I just have to recap a little bit here. So we have Dexter Park. We have Dexter Park, who's narcoleptic. So he falls asleep randomly, and when he goes into dream world, what we think are dreams are actually parallel universes. Am I getting that
Yes.
right? Okay.
Yes. I'm working on that premise.
Okay. So is it possible for that to really happen? Because if it could really happen, I'd be all in.
Jamie, I don't know what kind of conversation you wanted to turn this into, but
Let's go there. It's fun. Let's talk.
I believe.
Okay. All right. Interesting. Interesting. So where did you so you say that's what you believe, and I'm really curious to find out how you reached that conclusion then. Take me there. I do want to know. I'm really curious.
Well, uh, I've done a lot of I've done a lot of research and study on different on the. I'm a student of theology. I've done a lot of research and study on different religions as well as science, and I've come up with a lot of theories of my own that no one else has to understand or believe, where we're basically all saying the same thing using different words. And the idea behind the mental universe being, if you are a believer of God,
Mm-hmm.
that it is all a consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
and that consciousness is based on one thing, and it's based around the concept of everything being God. And if you can think of it, then it exists somewhere inside the mind of God or within the consciousness that I speak of, depending on how you want to view existence. And my idea is that if you can think of it, then it exists somewhere, and if it
Okay.
exists somewhere, then it can be visited. And our
Okay.
idea of visiting it is going to sleep and
Okay.
having dreams.
Interesting.
That's where I go with it.
Interesting. Okay. All right. So then, I come from a background of faith and traditional Christianity, belief in Jesus Christ as the Son of God, etc. So where does, and I'm curious because I love really good dialogue. So if you don't want to answer, you don't have to. But where does God fit into this? Do you think God is in everything, or do you think there's one God, or what is your personal belief as it relates to these ultimate different dimensions that you're talking about?
Well, when I say it, when God says, I create peace and I create evil, I alone do all these things. Then that made me think deeply, and say to myself, we can't go through life expecting. I don't mean to turn off those who have an aversion to the faith, but
You're
I don't want
fine. It's just good conversation. Good conversation, man. Yes.
But I said to myself, I said, and that mean, and of course I should have thought about this in the fifth time when I read the Bible cover to cover, but I didn't really get it until like the sixth. And when I said to myself, absolutely nothing exists without God's power. And if it's God's power, then God is in it in one way or another. And when you study quantum physics and they talk
Hmm.
about the theories of uh, particles being semi-conscious,
Right.
then you have to say to myself, well, where does that consciousness come from? Oh, it has to come from somewhere, and it's not coming from me, but it is coming from who or whatever is running this show. Yeah, that's the idea I'm going with. If that tells me that at one point, one way or another, at one level or another, that literally everything is God, because everything that's happening is probably, if you want to call it consciousness, inside the mind of God, and therefore we can access it in one way or another. And when you delve into uh, proclamations from ancient gurus and ancient priests and mystics and so forth and so on, they will all say the same thing. And that was a crazy revelation for me, because I have done such extensive research and study that I've read and seen and found out things that the average Christian doesn't want to hear.
Okay.
Doesn't want to learn. And I don't recommend it, to anyone who doesn't want to get mad. But I also have to recommend learning and collecting knowledge because there's a lot out there. And once we admit to ourselves that we just have no idea what's going on, then we can become a lot more open minded.
Well, I can definitely agree with you on the fact that we are small in the scope of God. And, obviously I'm going to come from a position where, God is the ultimate creator of life. And, when you look at the supremacy of who God is, I feel very finite and small. And I think there's so much mystery to who is going to be revealed in the person of Christ and God. Anyway, I am thankful that you shared all of that. I think that's really cool. I love to have these kind of dialogues and learn. And you're absolutely right. We have to seek out and ask those questions. And I think in today's culture, we don't ask enough questions and really listen to hear other people and then weigh it against what we believe.
Yeah,
So
100%.
So I really appreciate your honesty and vulnerability there. Thank you. We won't get too deep into that. Otherwise, our readers will be like, I thought I was listening for a book and not an apologetical theological conversation. That's not what Mad Lit
Yeah,
Musings about, but it is called
yeah,
Mad Lit
I hear
Musings
you.
for a reason.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, yeah, exactly. When you talked about us being so small, it's actually very funny. When I first realized that, I was studying, and I found out how laughably, ridiculously, infinitesimally huge the universe is, and we're so ridiculously small. And there's a quote by Carl Sagan when I believe it was Voyager 1 or Voyager 2. It flying through space, and it turned around and shot its camera at the Earth,
Mm,
and it says it is the earth is a speck of dust caught in a beam of light.
hmm
And I was like, wow, we're like, we're like nothing.
hmm
You know what I
hmm
mean? It's like we're
we have a
ridiculous.
lot of personal arrogance for being really, really small, don't we?
Yes, yes, yes. That's a great point. We do.
Yeah, yeah. I like to think I know a lot of things, and then when I start studying scripture and I start studying who God is, and like you said, the universe itself is enough to make me feel extremely small
Hmm.
and humbled, for sure, for sure.
Absolutely. I think it was Socrates who said, "The only thing I know is that I know nothing." And when somebody that smart says that, I said, "Well, you know what? I need to follow that kind of humility."
It's true, it's true. And then in our pursuit of finding truth, going at it with the humility of we don't know everything, so let's pursue
Hmm.
truth and what is truth and who created truth and where do we go from there. But
And
let's
what's
pull
the difference in my truth and your truth
and
compared
can
to
there
the ultimate
you
truth?
know, and I even like to ask the questions like, can there be a difference? Because if you have one truth and I have one truth, then what makes your truth truth and my truth truth?
Right. Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
so we can get in a lot of
This could go so far.
I know, and my brain will explode, and but it's good conversation to have. It's good conversation, as
Yeah,
somebody
I'm
who,
sorry if this is running long. I just never get to talk about this stuff with
no,
anybody.
no, I don't have a time limit. We just talk and
Okay, great.
whatever. But I always kind of look at it. Obviously, I shouldn't say obviously because you don't know me, but anybody who knows me, being raised where I believe that the Bible is 100% the inerrant word of God, I base all my studies and research on that precept. But I have to get to a point where why do I believe that it's the word of God? Right? Is
Mm-hmm.
there evidence to support that? And I think as in my world, in the Christian world, sometimes we don't ask enough questions like, how do we know that the Bible is truth? Because if I was going to make an argument to somebody that I believe that you need to take what the Bible says as gospel truth, then they're right in asking, well, how do you know that it's true? Right?
I agree with you 100%.
And being able, and I'm not sure what my point is. I had a point and it just flew
Well,
out my brain.
well, you know what? You could build on that with even questioning yourself further by
Mm-hmm.
asking yourself, well, you know what? Two people 2,000 years ago were sitting and they had conversations like this, and they believed in something else. And two people 2,000 years before them,
Mm-hmm.
they talked about this and they believed in something else, and their convictions were steadfast, and they knew 100% that their God was right, and this and that. And then when you look at the big picture, we're talking thousands of religions. since humankind started out, and we don't know anything about them, and we could basically say, all right, well, what makes mine right and theirs not? And at some point or another, you have to realize that you need to be 100% right or 100% wrong. There's no way, there's no meeting in the middle that you know what I mean? The
Hmm.
margin for error.
Well, really, if you look at the meaning of the word truth, truth is 100% correct, right? So if you're claiming truth, there can't be a deviation from it at that point, which I think is what you were just saying.
I think there's an ultimate truth, and there are different avenues toward getting there.
Okay. Okay.
That's what I think. I think that there are different ways of achieving it because I'm sure there are wonderful people, beautiful people. I mean, Abraham
Yeah.
was Christian. He was not Christian. He wasn't Jew, and he was favored by God. So
He was favored by God.
you have to say to yourself, okay, so maybe there's just more to this that I'm not getting. I'll just read some more after I'm done reading Protectors of the Light.
All right, that was a good segue. Let's give our readers some relief here. Going, whoa, Jamie, that's not what I signed up for when I listened.
Yeah.
But hey,
Right.
you know,
Editing is your friend.
you know what? I probably won't edit much of this out because honestly, I think this type of dialogue is it's good. It's good for people to start thinking about it. And regardless of where you're from, I think asking questions, searching out faith, searching out who God is, what is truth, who Jesus Christ is, and all the other elements of other religions in the world, where does it all line up and where does it fall in the scope of what I believe? And I do think those are important questions. So I'm not going to edit this out. I'm not going to edit it out. I'm not.
I told you, I'm from Jersey. I like to talk.
Well, we're obviously both liking to talk, so maybe I have some Jersey roots in me that I don't know about. Fun. Okay, so Protectors of the Light Crown. So I will say this. I have a large audience of people who are readers that read a lot of Christian fiction. So as I throw that out there, when they read your book and there's spiritual elements in it, it's safe to say, or I should say, am I safe to say that it's not coming from a strictly Christian viewpoint? However, it's also not coming at them with an intent to convert them to a specific belief, but mostly just science fiction story. Am I correct?
Yeah, there's no specific thing, but it depends on the reader.
Sure.
They've got a Jesus. His name is Phaester.
Okay.
And I had one reader contact me and said that she loved the chapter that explained Phaester. She said it really resonated with her Christian faith and such and such. And I had another reader that said, I couldn't read this whole thing, all this magic and stuff like that. It conflicted with my Christian beliefs and so forth and so on.
Interesting.
So I was like, you know what a fantasy book is, right? Like, you know what
that's true.
You know what you were buying.
This is true. I mean, really, anytime you're going to pick up a fantasy or sci-fi book, you've got to have an element of an imagination.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I totally get that.
It depends on the reader. There are two sides to that coin.
Yep. But that's cool. I'm an avid Harry Potter fan, and I have friends that won't go near the book with a 10-foot pole, but yet they love Tolkien, and I'm like, Harry Potter, Tolkien, what's the difference? But it's another conversation for another day, I guess.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm looking forward to reading this. I have not actually had a chance to pick it up yet, but I'm going to. The book is called Protectors of the Light Crown, and I'm correct, this is book 1 in a trilogy.
Book 1 in the trilogy, The Light Crown.
Okay.
Is the halo.
Okay. And what is the halo? Why do we have to protect that in this book?
Because the rich wants to steal divinity without actually owning it.
Got it. Okay. This is cool. The cover, for the record, is epic. Just want to throw that out. I really like it. Anybody who likes fantasy and sci-fi is going to like this cover.
Thank you. Yeah, the guy I hired knocked it out of the park.
Yeah, he did a really good job. And I love the fact that it's bright colors like the orange too, and the cityscape and the claw coming down. And yeah, if you're not watching this on YouTube and you're listening on Spotify or Apple or something like that, you're going to have to check it out on YouTube because...
Yeah, that was his idea too, because this is the city of Queen's Crown. And here you see this city all wrecked by the lizard. And that was his idea. And I was like, wow, what a cool.
That is really cool. Really
His
cool.
name is Cole Monroe Chitty. Find him on Google and hire him to draw your book for you.
He did a great job. It has a little bit of a graphic novel look to it, which I really appreciate. So that's awesome. So, well, you are quite the guy. I am had so much fun getting to know you.
Awesome.
Aspry Jones is your name, and it's aspryjones.com if people want to check you out. Is there anything else? I mean, we've pretty much conquered the world in this conversation, I think, but is there anything else that we should talk about that we haven't, that you really wanted us to know?
Man, you know what? I talked about more stuff with you than I have in my other podcast interviews.
Apologies in advance. Nothing blindsiding you with questions.
No, it's nice to say something different other than tell the story about how I created my characters again.
I guess I could have asked you that.
No, it's okay. But Aspry Wrights is where I'm on social media. Please drop by and say hello.
Awesome. All right, everybody do that. Check out the book. Thank you for being here today. This has been so much fun.
Thank you.
Let's check in again when you come out with book 2.
Absolutely. I can't wait.
All right. And that's a wrap for today here at Madlet Musings. I hope you join us again. And if you want to, be sure you like and subscribe here at your favorite podcast player or on YouTube, because you won't want to miss all the wonderful alerts that let you know when we have another conversation for you to eavesdrop on.